Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Atli Örvarsson. Over the course of his career, which spans 2 decades, Atli has written music for television and movies alike. His long list of credits includes Vantage Point, Babylon AD, Seasons of the Witch, The Eagle, Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunters, Chicago Med, The Hitman's Bodyguard, and many more. Atli recently scored How It Ends for Netflix television starring Theo James and Forest Whitaker. Welcome, Atli.
Thank you.
You had started out in the late 90s, as I understand. What prompted you to get into films and television?
Well, I was studying music at Berklee College of Music in the early 90s and sort of stumbled across the film music major that they offer there and just kind of fell in love with writing music for picture.
You also have your own band called Torrek, if I'm not mistaken, and actually the debut album was released in May 2018. Could you tell me a bit about the origins and how the band was founded?
Yeah, it's actually it was sort of it came out of producing and making the music for the movie The Eagle, and the way it came about is I got introduced to these two Irish musicians who were brothers, Flary and Owen Neph, a fiddler and a piper, and we ended up doing kind of a jam session, if you will, in a studio in London called British Grove, Mark Knopfler's beautiful studio in Chiswick in London, and so it was kind of a weird recording session or jam session, if you will, because so there's an Irish fiddler, Irish bagpipes, and me playing a German grand piano. So it was kind of an odd instrumentation, but we had so much fun, and we just felt kind of this kindred musical spirit, and decided that we needed to do something with this spark. So, but then it took many years to finally get an album finished and put it all together. Everybody's busy doing their own things, and at a time we were living in different continents, and so the band is the Neph Bros, myself, and my sister Hilda, who is the vocalist, and she's been singing on my scores for years. So at the time when the band was formed, we lived in 4 different countries. I was in LA, the fiddler Owen was in Madrid, his brother in Cork in Ireland, and my sister in Iceland. So it's been a bit of a puzzle to get the whole thing together, but we really enjoy it, and it's sort of it's kind of a combination of Irish and Icelandic traditional music, but used as an inspiration really to create something new and hopefully relevant for today. There's some electronics, there's some traditional music, and there's, I think, quite a strong cinematic undercurrent as well.
Yeah, the music sounds very cool. It's very fresh, it's like very enjoyable to boot. And you also had a couple of band gigs. I mean, in LA, you were in Madrid, if I'm correct. Are you currently working on more concerts? Maybe a small tour of some sort?
We're working on it. It how these things are. It always takes a bit of planning and almost like luck
Yeah.
to get these workouts when everybody can do it. Owen and Flary are now professors of music at the Limerick Institute of Technology in Ireland. I have my TV film career. My sister has her career. And but having said all of that, I feel like there's a really genuinely strong interest in the band with a certain niche audience, and there's been sort of talk about doing some more film music festivals. We actually did the Krakow Film Music Festival back in June,
Yeah.
and we're hoping to do some more of these, and who knows, maybe next summer go and play a few more sort of folk music festivals in Europe as well, but it all remains to be seen.
Great. Are you also working on a different album at the moment?
We haven't really started any new. Well, we have some tracks that are in the works, but we don't really have kind of a concrete plan for the next album. But the way we work is generally we just get together and we start jamming, and so the next opportunity we get to do that, we're definitely going to go for it. And I have a feeling this spring we'll start working on a lot of new material.
That's great. So you got a pretty um, challenging career, scoring movies, scoring television, your own bands, and you have also been involved in some pretty big productions. You know, you had been working on Pirates of the Caribbean 3, Angels and Demons, Simpsons movie. You had worked with Hans also on romantic comedies like The Holiday. How would you describe your involvement in those films back in the day? And do you feel that working on those projects really was kind of the best education in order to fully break out on your own?
Without a doubt, I think it's sort of. I often say, I had done a master's degree in composition, and this was sort of my doctorate was to work with Hans because it really. There's nothing like working in the field, and working in doing the actual thing. And I mean, I'd done a lot of scoring and work in the field before I met Hans, but
Yeah.
work. You could actually maybe say that my doctorate I did doing television with Mike Post, and the postdoctorate was with Hans Zimmer. But yeah, I mean, Hans is a unique creative force, and sitting next to him for a couple of years was an incredible experience.
Great. As I understand, you're back in your home country at the moment. Do you want to work there permanently, or do you have any plans to return to LA, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a really loaded question. I I doubt that I'm here for good back in Iceland. I'm really enjoying it at the moment. It was kind of important for me to come back and reconnect with my roots, and I have young children. I wanted them to connect with their roots, et cetera, et cetera. And I really love working where I live because it's very quiet and it's very peaceful. But at the same time, I've gotten used to living in a gigantic city like Los Angeles, and so I think I'm slightly hooked on the energy that comes with living in a place like that as well. So I go back a lot and I still have my studio at Remote Control, at Hans's complex. So, I one day at a time, I suppose. I mean, for the time being, I love being in Iceland, but I could easily see myself moving somewhere else in the future.
Since you have worked in both fields, TV series and also movies, what is the biggest, or what are the biggest differences to you personally between writing for film and television? Do you feel it's mostly budget or time constraints? How did you experience that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with talking about the time constraints. I think that's really the biggest difference. But on the other hand, television has changed a lot sort of the business in general has changed a lot since I started out. So some of the most creative, ambitious work that's being produced is now on television rather than film. And I actually think that filmmaking has become, at least in America, filmmaking has maybe lost some of its creative edge. There's still obviously, independent movies that are edgy and creative, but the studio movies tend to be very cookie cutter these days. They tend to be very, it's like almost like a system, with all the sequels and all that stuff. So I think, as a result, with more creative things being done in television, and quite frankly, artistically, people are taking bigger chances in television than they used to. And I think, as a result, there are projects in television where you have more time and you can be very creative. But a lot of the shows that I work on have a very tight schedule. I often have just a handful of days to do a whole episode of television, and so that's the big difference. Hopefully on a film you have at least a couple of months to really sink your teeth into coming up with the score, and on TV you sort of do the work in the beginning of the series. The first few episodes, the pilot, that's when you have time to really define the sound, and then it stays more or less the same for the duration of the show, and it's quite interesting. Every now and then I do something. I'll maybe, let's say I get bored on one of the Chicago shows and I start doing something different, and then I get a phone call from the producer telling me that, we've already figured out what the sound is. Why are you doing that? So, it's you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You maybe want to put on, new rims or something, change colors, but you got to keep the wheel rolling the way it's been established and the way it's been found to work.
Absolutely. I mean, you've had the benefits of working on so many films and also different genres, and I've noticed that you combine different elements, such as choir or electric guitars, synthesizers, and also orchestra. Do you feel right away that a combination of several elements would be the right approach when you see the film, or do you develop the sound and structure step by step?
It's different for every project, actually. Sometimes I feel like I know right away, and sometimes there's a lot of experimentation involved in it. I think it depends on the film. Some things are a bit straightforward. Let's say, you mentioned Season of the Witch. It's like a kind of a costume, swords and sandals. Well, not really swords and sandals, but it's a historical costume, fantastical movie, and you kind of know you're going to use a big orchestra and choir and something like that. But then, it's more sort of smaller independent films maybe where you kind of have to figure out or be more creative in a sense. And sometimes it's out of necessity because there simply isn't a budget to pay for a big orchestra or
Yeah.
a lot of musicians. So, and it's often a blessing in disguise having these budget constraints, weirdly. But it's all over the map, and I that's the beauty of it's the beauty of this career. Really, is that you're always jumping onto new projects and kind of I see them as like these sort of puzzles. You have to solve each puzzle, and it's something that keeps me incredibly just interested in what I do.
Has there been, or is there any project that you've worked on so far which you would describe as your biggest challenge, artistically or creatively?
Oh, let me think. They tend to all be quite challenging. For different reasons. I mean, for example, when I did The Eagle, I had this conversation with Kevin MacDonald, the director of the film, and he said to me, it's a movie that takes place in Scotland in the year 140 AD, roughly. And he says, I want the music to sound like it's coming off the screen, like, it's being made by these guys. And I said, well, Kevin, obviously nobody knows what this music sounded like. And he says, well, I know that, of course not, but I still want it to sound that way, and I want it to feel like it's handmade. And it's so, what followed was a big kind of learning process for me, and really trying to dig into kind of this archaeological discovery of music of the period and of the region, really. Celtic music, ancient Celtic music, those kinds of things. And that was a very big challenge, and trying to come up with a sort of an epic sounding score that still was true to somehow the traditions of that region. That was a really a fun challenge.
Oddly, you recently scored the film How It Ends for Netflix television, action thriller or disaster thriller to be exact, starring Theo James, Forrest Whitaker. Tell me a bit about how you got involved in that film.
Well, the director of the film is David Rosenthal,
Yeah.
and we're good friends, and we've been working together since maybe 2011, 2012. I did a movie with him back then called The Single Shot,
Yeah.
and since then we've done altogether we've done 4 movies. So it really sort of, as soon as David became involved with the project, he got in touch with me and told me about it, sent me the script. So we've been talking about it for quite some time. And yeah, it was just, I'm fortunate to have a handful of these relationships with directors who I really enjoy working with. And, they apparently enjoy working with me. And, those are the kinds of relationships you hope for, and especially somebody like David. And actually, most of the guys I work with are really love music and are into that sort of. It's fun to work with people who really are into music,
Yeah,
So
sure.
yeah, so David and I have a really good working relationship, and crazily, we've done a whole other movie since then, the remake of Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah.
So it's a prolific relationship.
This film in particular, how it ends, has this kind of post-apocalyptic scenario. What do you feel emotionally, and how do you figure out what's best for a project of this kind?
Well, I think that stories like these are quite interesting because you know there's hardly a bigger subject matter than some sort of an apocalyptic end of the world, but there's nothing really more personal in a way than thinking about how one would actually experience something like that. So it's a big juxtaposition of gigantic outside events versus personal inside struggles. So that was kind of the focus on my behalf, was kind of like this huge gap between the big event and the intimacy of people's feelings and how they interact in a time like this, and trying to imagine what that would be like.
As you just mentioned, you had worked with David Rosenthal a couple of times before in A Single Shot, The Perfect Guy. Uh, how do you communicate with him? Does he like have a very strong idea as to how the music should sound, or do you usually pitch the first idea?
It depends. He for the first movie we did, A Single Shot, he sent me a playlist of a bunch of kind of, you know, I guess you would describe it as being sort of contemporary classical music, although a lot of it was written like 50 years ago. But it's like Penderecki and Gorecki and even some modernists that I had never heard about that he had somehow dug up. So he had a very specific idea that he wanted the music to sound like um, very kind of stark and in that style. But since then, the more we work together, and perhaps some of the projects we've done since are more commercial than that particular movie. That was a very independent film, and we could kind of do whatever we wanted. And since then, being maybe a little bit more at the whim of sort of commercial tastes, I feel like maybe more and more I have a free hand in shaping the style of the music. But then when it comes time to apply it to the film, David is very, very hands-on, and as a matter of fact, for how it ends, he came up to Iceland and sat with me in my studio for a week, and we basically scored most of the film. Because I had written a lot of stuff, a lot of suites and themes. We could really sort of do a lot of the work with the film in a short amount of time, and that's where he is really, really specific and knows what he wants.
Did you have most of the meetings and spotting sessions when he visited you in Iceland, or did you also return to Los Angeles for a couple of meetings on this picture?
Well, I think, yeah, we went back and forth a bit. The way it worked was, if I remember correctly, the first time we met on the film and talked about and worked on it was in LA. And then David came for a week to, somewhere halfway through the writing process. And then he came back to Iceland for when I was recording the music. So, yeah, so it was kind of like, it was sort of an intercontinental process.
How much music was recorded for this film?
A ton. I don't know. I think it was somewhere around 75 or 80 minutes of music.
Okay. Are there any plans to release it physically or digitally or both?
There is actually, and I'm working on it as we speak. The score will come out mid-October or so.
CD or just a download?
I think it's just going to be a download to begin with anyway.
How big was the orchestra on this one, or the string section in particular?
It wasn't very big, to be honest. It was probably, I want to say 25 or 27 players. And, partially it's a budget constraint and partially it's an artistic choice. I wanted the band to be more intimate than sort of massive, but yeah, and I feel like I've been recording quite a bit in Iceland lately, and I feel like sort of a small to medium-sized string orchestra here sounds really good and has a kind of a specific personality in the sound. So I'm really happy with this, with that size, 25 to 30 players in the hall here in Akureyri with his orchestra. It seems to be a good sound.
And on top of that, you also added, the synths and sound you used and sound design. Did you bring back Jörg Hüttner for this project, whom you had worked with before?
Yes, Jörg was a part of it. He did a lot of. I worked with some of my usual collaborators. There's a guitar player here called Christian Edelstein, and Christian, we recorded a ton of material, and a lot of it then went to Jörg, and he actually made sounds out of that. And yeah, Jörg is our relationship goes back to Vantage Point, during which time Jörg was my assistant. And then, of course, he has gone on to have a quite a prolific career as a sound designer and producer and programmer. So it's always, it's great. What happens with these kinds of relationships with people is that you develop, they start to understand your taste and your aesthetics, and you develop a shorthand in terms of how things should be done, and it makes things a lot easier than having to reinvent the wheel each time.
I mean, as you've just mentioned, there's a certain feeling of trust, and you know what the other person wants because you have worked together so many times. So I guess it makes things a lot easier than, starting from scratch all the time.
Absolutely, and that's true for, the people who record, Steve McLaughlin records and mixes for me. Julian Kershaw usually does my orchestrations. I mean, it's just like kind of finding your team is such a great asset, to have a team around you that you know really well and they know you, and everybody, it becomes a well-oiled machine.
On how it ends, did you write a suite first, or did you try to underscore certain characters at first, or did you feel it was more logical on this project to figure out the general tone first in order to capture the essence of it?
I almost, well, I think not almost, I think I always start by writing themes or suites or something like that, because, something I've learned from my mentors and I've learned from experience as well is if you don't have solid music to build your score and your cues on, then you end up with wallpaper.
Yeah.
You can sit and watch the film and follow it and score it, but if there's no strong idea or concept or something, then it just becomes very bland and boring. So yeah, I wrote several themes that basically they are the score, and the first one is a very intimate kind of piece, which became didn't really intend it to be that, but it became the theme of the two lead characters, Tom and Will, who end up going on this sort of in the beginning they hate each other, but they end up having to like each other or having to work together and grow to like each other through the film. And so it's a very kind of an intimate piano piece. And I think what will surprise people who listen to the soundtrack is that, most of it is actually very emotional music, and so I think that the focus in the film, not just from me, but from the director and just in the film itself, is really about how the hell would it feel if the world was coming to an end,
Yeah.
and so and I quite honestly, I use maybe one set piece, kind of action piece, but I find that when you're putting together an album, I guess there are people who like to sit and listen to action music, but it seems more interesting to me to put the melodic or the, I don't know, sort of more listenable music on the album. So it's there's definitely an emphasis on that side of the coin rather than the actiony things.
Yeah, it's always the state of preference. There are so many people that would like to listen to the complete score all the time, or the score preferably in chronological order, or they dislike suites or whatever. So it's always, I think, an album production and deciding what to put on and what to omit. I think it's pretty tough.
Well, one thing's for sure, you cannot make everyone happy.
No.
It's just impossible. So you
Not,
just got to follow your own instincts, and I did the album that I like, and
sure.
hopefully somebody else will like it.
I'm looking forward to hearing the complete album. Did you feel that how it ends presented any challenges or obstacles you hadn't experienced beforehand?
Well, I'll tell you what, the time frame was extremely challenging, but I'm sort of used to that from television. But in terms of doing a full kind of action drama film score, it was really challenging to get it done. I think I had about a month or something to do the whole score.
Wow,
So that was a challenge.
that's pretty stiff.
Yeah, and no, other than that, I mean, it wasn't. Again, I think being with a director I know really well, we didn't have to answer very much to the producers of the film. They gave us kind of a free rein, and
Yeah.
it was generally a smooth sailing, really, but just it was a very quick sailing. So that was probably the biggest challenge, really.
Do you generally feel a need to watch a rough cut of the film, or is a script or a conversation with the director equally as inspiring to you?
I think the conversation with the director is always the most valuable tool, if you will. And I think it's just, even if you know, read the script and watch a rough cut and do all these things, the talks with them, I find, is where you really learn what the film is about, and and you get to the essence of the story. In this case, yeah, I saw some rough cuts. I mean, I visited David in the cutting room in LA quite early on, but by the time I jumped in to score the film, it was pretty far along.
Hmm.
And again, it was really our conversations about it that made me get to understanding what I needed to do.
Previously, you had mentioned Jacob's Ladder. Now, as I understand, the project has already been finished, right?
Yes, this is correct.
Are you already allowed to give me some insights on this project in terms of score?
Yeah, I think I can comment on it a little bit. I mean, it's yeah, it's that's another interesting project because we started it a few years ago. I mean, it's probably at least 2 years ago that I did my first round of writing music for it, and then it sort of got shelved. They decided that the script needed to be revamped, and it was just kind of put on hold because David had signed a contract to do another film in the meantime. So while he was doing How It Ends, they reshot some scenes, and it was all sort of being worked on in the background. And then as soon as How It Ends was done, he jumped in to the cutting room, finalized a cut in a month, and I had to go and score it. So, but I think there was an evolution in the sound of the score between the first time I worked on it and when I finished it. It was much more kind of electronic and sort of cold in the beginning, and what I ended up with is much more kind of a, I don't know, maybe a more traditional take on it. It's, and I don't mean that literally. It's by no means kind of a traditional music, but it's like it's more melodic and maybe more classical in its approach than I expected it to be in the beginning. And as always, I mean, it is a suspense horror thriller, and I always find that writing music in that genre is just so much fun because
Yeah.
you can kind of dig into some really dark, twisted stuff, and it just there's a lot to be explored in that realm.
Great. Looking forward to that one. Are you allowed to disclose what else you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, I'm currently working on a new film from Grímur Hákonarson,
Hmm.
who's an Icelandic director who did the movie Rams that won the big prize in Cannes a few years ago. So his follow-up film is called The County, and we've just started working on that. And you know, I can give you a little bit of a teaser on that, which is that instead of the accordion was the main instrument for the last score, and this time it's old analog synths. So we've gone a totally different route, really. But yeah, so that's in the works, and there are several projects in the pipelines with some of my previous relationship directors, or directors that I have former relationships with that are coming, they're being shot. Or are about to be shot. So there's quite a list of things in the pipelines, thankfully. And simultaneously, I'm also working on some of my new solo material that I'm working on, kind of piano,
Hmm.
string music that I'm planning on releasing an album, hopefully next year. And got my TV shows. So it's just endless list of different things that I've been somehow always find things to do.
Keeping busy.
Yeah, I really I love to be busy.
Yeah.
I haven't figured out whether I'm a workaholic or not. My wife, so, but I tell her that it's not that. I'm just very passionate about what I do, and so the jury is out. But in the meantime, I'm gonna keep making music, and as long as it is inspiring and gives me a lot of energy like it does now, I'm gonna keep going.
How many hours a day do you usually work? I mean, it probably depends on every project, but do you also like sometimes work like 15 or 18 hours a day?
It happens. It's yeah, it's 18 hours is a little much, but 15 hours is not an uncommon number. But I have a family, I have little children, and I try to find a way to balance it. And so I've really learned I feel like, to be more efficient with my time as time goes by. So,
Yes.
I think in the beginning, you spend a lot of time questioning things and sort of, yeah, going in circles really. But you just have to learn to be more efficient with your time, and somehow things always get done, and hopefully it'll continue that way.
I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, but also, working 15 hours a day, that's quite enough. It sounds like that must be, quite exhausting.
It is, and that's the other thing that I think one has to be mindful of is find ways to not burn out, and not, because for me, it's a long game. One of the things that I think is really great about a career as a film composer is that you can do it for the rest of your life, and you can actually get better for the rest of your life. I mean, I think that there are certain composers that just keep reinventing themselves and keep getting better, and which is such an inspiration for me. And so, you got to be careful not to burn out. But
Yeah.
when there's a deadline, and when things just have to be done, you got to do it. And there's an interesting kind of parallel, I think, between film composers and athletes. Sometimes, there's like this sort of, it's a very competitive streak in a lot of us, and I think, and it's almost like this. It's like running a marathon or something. Once you're done, you're exhausted, but you feel great that you got it done.
Adli, do you have anything else on your mind? Is there anything you would like to add, project-wise or career-wise?
No, I don't think so. I just want to get back to recording some piano that I was working on. But no, to be honest, I think we've touched on a lot of cool things, and I really enjoyed the chat.
Great. Adli, I would like to thank you again for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really enjoyed talking to you. It was a pleasure. And I hope we get to talk again in the future.
Me too. It was fun.
Great. And thanks again and have a nice day.
Terrific. You too.